Security is a people problem that technology helps solve. Opening, the policy that nobody followed. There is a pattern that repeats itself in organizations of every size, in every industry, with remarkable consistency. The security team identifies a risk. Let us say employees are using personal email to send work documents because the corporate file sharing system is slow and requires multiple authentication steps. The response is a policy. Do not use personal email for company data. The policy is documented, distributed, acknowledged by every employee, and added to the annual compliance checklist. The behavior continues. A year later, the security team runs a data loss prevention report and finds that personal email usage for work documents has actually increased. What went wrong? Not the policy. The policy was correct, not the training. The training explained the risk clearly. What went wrong is that the policy addressed the behavior without addressing the reason for the behavior. The employees were not using personal email because they misunderstood the security risk. They were using it because it was faster, simpler, and more effective than the approved alternative. They had a job to do and a deadline to meet, and the approved tool was in the way of both. This is what it means to say that security is a people problem that technology helps solve. It does not mean that people are the problem. It means that security failures surface as human behaviors, workarounds, shortcuts, oversights, decisions under pressure. But the root cause of those behaviors is almost always a design failure, not a character failure. The employees reaching for personal email are solving a real productivity problem in the most rational way available to them, given the options they have. The security team's job is to change the options, not to change the people. Technology that makes the secure way the easy way does not need a compliance policy to work. It does not need annual training to maintain. It does not need disciplinary consequences to enforce. People follow it naturally because it removes friction rather than adding it. That is the design principle this session is entirely about, and understanding it at every level, from governance through implementation, through the human dynamics that make security culture succeed or fail, is what we are building toward. The foundation, governance, policy, and the gap between them. Before we can talk about building effective security culture, the vocabulary of governance needs to be precise, because the confusion between these terms produces some of the most persistent failures in organizational security. Governance is the framework within which decisions about security are made and accountability is assigned. It is the set of structures, committees, roles, reporting lines, review processes that ensure security requirements are understood, resourced, and acted on at the appropriate level of the organization. Governance answers the question of who is responsible for security, how security priorities are set, and how the organization ensures that security commitments are actually kept rather than merely stated. Without governance, security is a series of individual decisions made by whoever happens to care about it that week, and those decisions are inconsistent, underfunded, and invisible to the people who need to act on them. A policy is a formal statement of what the organization requires. It is the output of governance, the documented expression of a security decision that has been made at the appropriate level of authority. A data classification policy states that certain categories of data must be handled in certain ways. An acceptable use policy states what employees may and may not do with company technology. An access control policy states how permissions are granted, reviewed, and revoked. Policies define the expected behavior. They do not, by themselves, produce it. A standard is the specific, measurable requirement that gives a policy its technical substance. Where a policy says that sensitive data must be encrypted in transit, the standard specifies that the encryption must use TLS version 1.2 or above, that specific cipher suites are approved, and that certain deprecated configurations are prohibited. But the AUP that is presented once, acknowledged with a click, and never discussed again is an AUP that is functioning as a legal instrument rather than as a behavioral guide. The employees who are going to use personal email for work documents despite the policy will have clicked through the AUP that prohibits it. What they did not experience was a workplace environment that made the approved alternative genuinely preferable. Policy creates the framework. Culture produces the behavior. The structural tension, why people bypass security controls. Understanding why people bypass security controls is not an exercise in sympathy. It is a diagnostic framework. If you know the specific mechanism by which a control is being worked around, you can redesign the control rather than repeating the same training that has already failed to change the behavior. There are several distinct mechanisms by which legitimate users bypass security controls, and each one has a different design implication. The first mechanism is friction mismatch. The insecure path is faster than the secure path. The sales team using USB drives rather than the corporate file share is a friction mismatch example. The insecure behavior takes 30 seconds. The secure behavior takes 5 minutes and requires navigating a system that is slow, poorly designed, and requires multiple authentication steps. No amount of policy or training will sustainably redirect behavior from a 30-second path to a 5-minute path when both paths produce the same outcome for the user. The design response is to eliminate the friction mismatch, to make the secure path at least as fast and simple as the insecure one. The second mechanism is usability failure. The secure system is genuinely difficult to use correctly. A user who receives a phishing email and wants to report it, but the reporting mechanism requires them to forward it to a specific address in a specific format with a specific subject line, will report it once, experience difficulty, and then delete subsequent suspicious emails rather than repeat the friction. A phishing report button that requires one click turns the same user into a human censor without requiring them to understand or remember any procedure. The design response is to build security actions into the tools people already use in the form of the simplest possible interaction. The third mechanism is authority misalignment. Security rules feel imposed from outside rather than derived from shared understanding of the risk. An employee who understands why a rule exists is more likely to follow it and to apply judgment correctly in situations the rule does not explicitly cover. An employee who experiences security policy as arbitrary restriction, rules imposed by a team that seems more interested in compliance than in helping people work, will follow the rules when observed and find workarounds when not. The design response is communication and culture rather than policy and enforcement. Explaining the rationale for controls, demonstrating that the security team treats usability as a real concern, and creating channels through which employees can raise concerns about controls that are creating unnecessary friction. The fourth mechanism is social engineering exploitation of helpfulness. This is different from the others because it is not a user bypassing a control. It is an attacker exploiting the user's genuine desire to be helpful. The help desk agent who resets a privileged account password for a caller who claims to be an executive with an urgent need is not making a security error in the sense of ignoring a rule. They're making a security error by following their natural human instinct to help, in a situation where the procedure should have told them that helpfulness must be subordinated to verification. Social engineering exploits helpfulness, not greed or laziness. The design response is procedures that give employees a safe and socially acceptable way to say no without feeling unhelpful. Verification scripts, callback procedures, dual authorization requirements, paired with explicit organizational support for following those procedures, even when it creates temporary frustration for the requester. Architecture: what a people-centered program actually looks like. The architecture of a security program that treats the human dimension as a design problem rather than a compliance problem has three structural elements that must be built and maintained simultaneously. The first element is a security awareness program that is designed as a behavioral change intervention rather than a knowledge transfer exercise. Knowledge does not reliably produce behavior change. Telling someone that phishing emails are dangerous does not reliably make them better at identifying phishing emails in the moment of stress when they are reading their 100th email of the day. What produces behavioral change is repeated practice with immediate feedback in conditions that approximate the real situation. This is why spaced, varied phishing simulations with immediate just-in-time training, delivered at the moment of the failure rather than in a separate module weeks later, produce measurably better outcomes than annual training videos. Designing that program for new hires has a specific structure. In the first week, the focus is orientation and trust building rather than technical content. The new hire is learning the culture of the organization, building relationships with their team, and absorbing an enormous amount of new information. The security content delivered in week 1 should be framed as context. Here is why security matters in our specific environment. Here is what we are protecting and why it matters, rather than rules and restrictions. The goal of week 1 is for the new hire to understand what the organization cares about, not to memorize a list of prohibited behaviors. In the first month, the focus expands to practical skills for the specific role. What are the real phishing patterns that target people in this industry? How does the phishing report button work? What is the process for requesting access to a new system? These are the operational touchpoints that the employee will encounter in their actual day-to-day work. The training is grounded in their reality rather than in a generic compliance curriculum. In the first quarter, the focus shifts to integration and feedback. The new hire encounters their first security event or simulation, receives feedback on how they handled it, and has the opportunity to ask questions that have emerged from their actual experience. By the end of the quarter, the goal is for security to feel like a normal part of how the job is done, rather than a separate obligation imposed from outside. The second structural element is a security champion program that creates a distributed network of security-aware people throughout the organization, rather than concentrating all security competency in a dedicated security team. A security champion is a member of a non-security business unit, a developer in engineering, a coordinator in finance, a manager in sales, who has received additional security training and serves as the first point of contact for security questions and concerns within their department. The champion program works because it addresses the authority misalignment mechanism. A security requirement communicated by a peer in the same department, in the language of that department's actual workflows and concerns, is received differently from the same requirement communicated by an external security team. The champion provides translation. They understand both the security requirement and the operational constraints of their department, and they can find solutions that satisfy both rather than presenting them as in conflict. The third structural element is a recognition and reporting program that makes the right security behaviors visible and rewarded. The default in most organizations is that security compliance is invisible. It only gets attention when it fails, and that security failure is punished. This incentive structure produces employees who hide security mistakes rather than reporting them, because the personal cost of reporting is higher than the personal cost of hoping the problem goes away. A well-designed recognition program inverts this. Employees who report suspicious emails, who flag security concerns before they become incidents, who identify policy violations in their department and surface them to the security team, receive positive recognition. The organization's security posture improves because information flows toward the security team rather than being suppressed. Tools that make the secure path easy. 4 tools deserve examination through the lens of which specific human problem each one solves, what it costs in organizational terms, and where it fails to deliver the behavioral change it is designed for. A password manager solves the cognitive load problem that produces weak, reused passwords. The fundamental issue with strong password requirements is that they conflict with human memory capacity. A person who manages 40 different systems at work and another 20 in their personal life cannot maintain 40-plus unique, complex, frequently rotated passwords in memory. The behavioral response to this cognitive overload, creating predictable patterns, reusing passwords across systems, writing passwords down, maintaining a spreadsheet of credentials, produces exactly the credential vulnerabilities that strong password policies are designed to prevent. A password manager removes the memory requirement entirely. The user creates one strong master passphrase, and the password manager generates and stores unique, cryptographically random passwords for every system. The secure behavior becomes the easier behavior. The cost is organizational. Deploying an enterprise password manager, training employees to use it, managing the master credential recovery process, and addressing the risk that the password manager itself becomes a high-value target. The limitation is adoption. A password manager that is available but not required will not be used by the employees who need it most, because those employees are the ones who have found the most comfortable workarounds for the memory problem. Single sign-on addresses authentication fatigue. The accumulation of login friction across multiple systems that erodes both productivity and security hygiene. When an employee must authenticate independently to 10 different systems during their workday, each requiring a separate credential, the cumulative friction of those authentications creates pressure toward shortcuts. Staying logged into sensitive systems indefinitely, using the same password across multiple systems, or storing credentials in an unsecured location to reduce the time spent retrieving them. SSO consolidates those 10 authentications into one, backed by a strong identity provider with MFA. The result is that the employee's experience is dramatically simpler, while the security posture is dramatically stronger. One strong authentication replaces 10 weak ones. The cost is the complexity of the SSO infrastructure and the single point of failure risk of the identity provider. The limitation is that SSO cannot be applied to every system. Legacy applications that predate standardized authentication protocols require additional integration work or remain outside the SSO umbrella as exception cases that must be managed separately. A phishing report button solves the friction in reporting problem that causes employees to delete suspicious emails rather than surfacing them to the security team. The traditional path for reporting a suspicious email, forward it to a security alias in a specific format, or submit a ticket through a service management portal. Requires the employee to know the correct alias or portal, to take a deliberate additional action beyond their normal email workflow, and to invest more time in reporting than in simply deleting the email. The report button, integrated directly into the email client, collapses this process to a single click. The employee reports the email in the same motion they would use to delete it. The security team receives the submission with all necessary metadata, headers, source IP, attachment hash, automatically. The organizational benefit extends beyond the individual report. The security team now has a continuous stream of employee-flagged suspicious emails that can be used to identify active phishing campaigns targeting the organization before those campaigns succeed. The limitation is that a report button creates false confidence without follow-through. If the security team receives reports and does not acknowledge them, does not provide feedback to the reporter, and does not close the loop by notifying the reporter of the verdict, employees learn that reporting does nothing and stop using it. SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, addresses analyst burnout, which is one of the most serious and under-acknowledged people problems in security operations. A SOC analyst who spends the majority of their day performing the same repetitive enrichment tasks, looking up IP reputation, querying the asset database, cross-referencing alert timestamps against authentication logs, is performing high-volume, low-judgment work that produces cognitive fatigue without producing professional development. The analyst's most valuable capability is contextual judgment, the ability to recognize patterns, ask the right question, and distinguish a genuine incident from a sophisticated false positive. That capability is eroded, not exercised, by repetitive procedural work. SOAR automates the procedural steps, ensuring that every alert arrives at the analyst's queue already enriched with reputation data, asset context, and correlated events. The analyst starts their investigation at the point where judgment is required rather than at the beginning of a mechanical process. The cost is the implementation complexity of building and maintaining accurate playbooks, and the risk that an automated mistake is applied at scale. An automation that incorrectly marks a category of alerts as benign will close all of them without human review. The limitation is that SOAR requires well-defined processes before it can automate them. An organization whose incident response processes are inconsistent and undocumented cannot automate them effectively. The automation will encode the inconsistency. Implementation. Building programs that change behavior. Two implementation scenarios deserve the full treatment because they represent the difference between a security awareness program that produces compliance and one that produces genuine behavioral change. The first is the Security Champion Program. The architecture of an effective champion program starts with selection. Champions are not appointed from the top down. They're nominated by their peers, or they self-select based on demonstrated interest in security. A champion who is chosen because their manager needed to send someone to the security training is a different person from a champion who asked to attend because they want to understand how to build more secure systems. Selection criteria should look for people who are already asking security questions in their daily work, not people who are convenient to nominate. The onboarding for champions covers topics their standard security awareness training did not. Threat modeling for their specific department's workflows, the specific attack patterns most relevant to their role and the data they handle, how to run a tabletop exercise with their team, and how to escalate a security concern through the formal channel while managing the relationship with their manager. The champion needs to be equipped to be a genuine resource, not just a relay point between the security team and the business. The ongoing support structure matters as much as the initial training. A monthly or bi-weekly briefing where the security team shares relevant intelligence. What phishing campaigns are currently targeting the industry? What the most recent security incidents involved? What new controls are being rolled out and why? Keeps champions current and makes them feel like insiders rather than volunteers being used for security team overhead. Champions who feel supported and informed are the ones who stay in the program and invest in it. Champions who receive no follow-up after their initial training drift away from the role within 6 months. The second implementation scenario is the recognition and reward program. The most effective design aligns the recognition with the specific behavior you want to reinforce. A general annual award for the most security-conscious employee produces one piece of recognition per year for one person, while everyone else's security behavior goes unremarked. What produces sustained behavioral change is frequent, immediate, low-ceremony recognition for specific observable actions. The employee who reported the phishing email that turned out to be real gets a thank you from the CISO that names specifically what they did and why it mattered. The team that completed a security training module gets a visible acknowledgement in the company all hands. The developer who caught a SQL injection vulnerability in code review gets credit in the team retrospective. The recognition program must be paired with a feedback loop that closes the reporting cycle. When an employee reports a suspicious email, they receive a response within 24 hours that tells them what it was: a real phishing attempt, a legitimate marketing email, a simulation, and why the verdict was what it was. When an employee raises a security concern with their champion, the champion follows up with the outcome. The feedback loop is what transforms reporting from a one-way action into a two-way interaction, and two-way interactions are what build the habits that sustain the program over years rather than months. When human-centered security fails, 3 scenarios. 3 troubleshooting scenarios illuminate the specific failure modes that occur when security programs treat people as the problem to be fixed rather than the system to be designed for. The first scenario involves a phishing simulation program where click rates remain at 40% despite 12 months of quarterly simulations and mandatory training. The click rate is not improving. The training team is frustrated. The CISO is asking questions. The diagnostic begins not with the people, but with the simulations themselves. Pull the last 4 campaigns and categorize the templates used. Are all 4 simulations using the same category of lure? All urgency-based, all IT help desk impersonation, all shipping notification templates? If the simulation program has been running variations of the same attack pattern, employees may have developed resistance to that specific pattern while remaining completely unprepared for others. The click rate on IT help desk simulations may be 5%, while the click rate on executive impersonation simulations is 60%, and the blended rate of 40% is masking this variation. If the template distribution is adequately varied, the next diagnostic question is timing and delivery. Are simulations being sent at times when employees are most cognitively loaded? Monday mornings, Friday afternoons, during major project deadlines? Clicking a phishing link when cognitively overloaded is not the same behavioral signal as clicking one during a relaxed moment. The simulation conditions should vary to include these high-stress periods, but the training response should acknowledge that stress increases susceptibility rather than treating high-stress clicks as evidence of individual failure. If timing is appropriately varied and templates are diverse, The diagnostic moves to the training experience itself. What happens immediately after a click? If the training module delivered at the moment of click is the same 15-minute module that was delivered in the onboarding curriculum, employees are re-experiencing training they have already seen and dismissed. The just-in-time training needs to be specific to the template that was clicked. If an employee clicked an executive impersonation lure, the training should specifically address how to verify executive requests, what signals in the email indicated it was suspicious, and how to report without risk of embarrassment if the request turns out to be legitimate. Specificity of feedback is what produces the behavioral update that generic training does not. The second scenario involved a reported suspicious email that received no SOC response for 48 hours. During that time, the employee who reported it, growing impatient and curious, clicked the link to see if it was actually dangerous. It was. The incident that followed could have been prevented if the report had been acknowledged and acted on within the window between the employee's report and their click. The diagnostic is a process investigation rather than a technical investigation. Pull the ticket queue for the reporting period and trace the journey of the report from submission to the SOC inbox. How many total reports were received in that period? If the SOC received 500 reports in 48 hours because a phishing campaign was hitting the organization at scale, the lack of response is a triage capacity problem. The queue is too large to process in the expected time frame. The fix is not to tell analysts to work faster. It is to build automated triage into the report processing pipeline. Automated analysis of the submitted email header and URL against threat intelligence feeds, which immediately classifies reports into confirmed malicious, likely benign categories and prioritizes the analyst queue accordingly. The analyst is no longer reviewing 500 reports manually. They're reviewing the 23 that the automated triage flagged as confirmed or likely malicious. If the queue was normal volume and the report still went unacknowledged, the diagnostic shifts to workflow. Did the report arrive in the correct queue? A misconfigured email routing rule or an expired email alias can cause reports to arrive in a location that nobody monitors. Check the delivery destination. Was the analyst who owned the queue absent? And is there a coverage process for queue ownership during absence? Check the RODA. Was the alert deprioritized because the automated enrichment classified the reporting email as coming from the employee's own domain and therefore low risk? Check the enrichment logic for the report processing pipeline. The fix, regardless of root cause, includes both the technical resolution and a communication protocol. Every report receives an automated acknowledgement within 15 minutes of submission, not a resolution, an acknowledgement that confirms the report was received and provides a reference number. This costs nothing technically and produces a significant improvement in reporter experience because the employee knows their action was recorded and is being processed. It also removes the most common trigger for the curiosity click. The employee who clicks the link because they receive no response is often trying to self-resolve an anxiety that the acknowledgement would have addressed. The third scenario is the department head who refuses to participate in mandatory security awareness training. They claim the training is irrelevant to their role, takes time they do not have, and treats them like an entry-level employee rather than a senior leader. The diagnostic is an engagement gap analysis rather than a compliance enforcement exercise. The first question is whether the training is actually irrelevant to the department head's role. If the training curriculum was designed for individual contributors, it covers how to recognize phishing emails and how to use the password manager. And the department head's actual security risk is different. They have administrative access to financial systems, They're targets for executive impersonation scams. They make vendor procurement decisions that carry third-party risk. Then the training is genuinely misaligned with their risk profile. The correct response is not to enforce participation in training that does not address their actual risk. It is to redesign the training path for senior leaders to cover the threats they actually face and the decisions they actually make. The second question is whether the escalation path for the exception is appropriate. A department head who refuses mandatory training is not just a training compliance problem. It is a governance signal. If senior leaders are exempt from security requirements that apply to everyone else, that exemption is visible to the entire organization, and it communicates that security is for some people but not for leadership. The escalation should go to the CISO, who can have a peer conversation with the department head about their risk profile and the organizational signal that a public exemption would send. The outcome should be either modified training that is genuinely relevant to the department head's role, which they agreed to complete, or a formal documented exception that acknowledges the non-compliance, names the accepting authority, and is reviewed annually. 3 roles. 3 human dimensions of security. 3 roles encounter the people dimension of security at fundamentally different layers, and each one's effectiveness depends on a different human skill that technical training alone cannot provide. The security awareness manager lives entirely in the space between security policy and human behavior. Their defining moment is not a technical event. It is the conversation with a business unit leader who says the security requirements are getting in the way of their team's productivity. The awareness manager who treats this as a compliance problem, who responds with a reference to the policy and a reminder of the consequences of noncompliance, has answered the wrong question. The productivity complaint is a signal that a control is producing friction that exceeds its security benefit. The awareness manager who treats it as a design problem, who asks what specifically is creating the friction, what the business unit is trying to accomplish, and whether the security requirement can be met through a less intrusive mechanism, is doing the actual work of making security sustainable. Their specific skill is the ability to investigate engagement gaps without creating defensiveness. When a department head refuses training, when a team is consistently failing phishing simulations, when a report button is not being used despite deployment. These are behavioral signals that the security program has a design problem, not a people problem. Diagnosing the design problem requires asking questions in a way that does not make the people feel blamed, because people who feel blamed stop providing accurate information about what is actually happening. The SOC analyst at L2 and L3 level encounters the people dimension in incident investigation, specifically in the moment where a technical alert requires them to reconstruct human intent. The junior analyst who escalates a server compromise based on a single suspicious command in the shell history is making the error of treating a technical observable as a verdict rather than as a hypothesis. The mentoring conversation that follows is about the human-in-the-loop investigation. What was the person logged into this server actually trying to do? What were they doing before this command? And does the behavioral context support or refute the hypothesis that this was malicious? This investigation requires the SOC analyst to think like a human being in addition to thinking like a technical responder. They need to ask whether the timing of the suspicious activity correlates with a known event in the employee's schedule, a project they were working on, a change request they submitted, a meeting they were in. They need to ask whether the command is one that a legitimate user in this role would plausibly have typed by accident. Maybe a paste error, maybe a test that was expected to fail, maybe a mistyped command in an unfamiliar environment. The human-in-the-loop investigation does not make the analyst less rigorous. It makes them more accurate because they are evaluating a fuller picture of what happened rather than treating one command in isolation as evidence of compromise. The security analyst at an MSSP encounters the people dimension in the customer relationship, specifically in the moment when a technically correct tuning recommendation conflicts with the customer's organizational dynamics. When a customer complains of too many alerts, the technically correct response is to analyze the alert stream, identify tuning opportunities, and implement suppression rules that reduce noise without reducing coverage. But the customer relationship is a human relationship, and the customer's complaint about alert volume is often a proxy for a deeper concern. Their SOC team is exhausted. They feel like the service is adding burden rather than reducing it, and they're questioning the value of the relationship. The MSSP analyst who only addresses the technical request, who tunes the alerts and considers the issue resolved, has fixed the metric while missing the relationship signal. The analyst who addresses both, who acknowledges the burden, explains what they're doing to reduce it and why, asks what the customer's team is experiencing in terms of investigation workflows, and follows up after the tuning to confirm that the impact on analyst workload matched the expectation, is building the trust that makes the relationship sustainable. The technical work and the relationship work are not separable. The quality of the security outcomes the customer receives depends partly on the technical capability of the service and partly on the quality of information the customer is willing to share about their environment, their priorities, and their constraints. That information flows in direct proportion to the trust in the relationship. Case scenario: the sales team and the forbidden USB drives. You are the security lead at a professional services firm with a 400-person sales organization. The firm handles client proposals, pricing models, and presentation decks that contain commercially sensitive information. 3 months ago, the DLP system flagged a pattern. Members of the sales team have been using personal USB drives to transfer large files between their work laptops and presentation systems in client meeting rooms. The drives are sometimes left behind in meeting rooms. One was found in a hotel business center. The USB policy prohibits personal media devices on corporate equipment. The policy has been in place for 2 years. Every member of the sales team signed the acceptable use policy that includes this prohibition. The security team's first instinct is to escalate the violations for disciplinary review. Before you do that, you investigate the behavior. You set up brief conversations with 5 members of the sales team, not to interrogate them, but to understand what problem the USB drives are solving. What you learn is this: the corporate file share requires a VPN connection to access from external locations. The VPN drops connections frequently in hotel networks and conference center Wi-Fi environments. The file share, once connected, is slow for large files. A 40-megabyte presentation deck takes 3 to 4 minutes to download, which is a conspicuous delay when a client is sitting in the room waiting. The USB drive takes 30 seconds. The constraint that shapes your response is financial. You are operating in the middle of the firm's budget cycle, and a significant new technology investment requires a capital approval process that takes 12 to 16 weeks. You cannot deploy a new file sharing solution before next quarter. Within the current budget cycle, your first action is tactical. You identify that the file sharing bottleneck is primarily a client-site VPN reliability problem. You work with the network team to configure a split-tunnel VPN profile specifically for the file share domain. which reduces the authentication overhead and the connection stability issues associated with the full tunnel configuration. You deploy a content delivery network cache for the file share, which reduces download times for recently accessed files significantly. These changes are deployable in 2 weeks using existing infrastructure and existing licensing. The sales team's download experience improves from 3 to 4 minutes to under 45 seconds for cache files. The VPN stability issue is not fully resolved, but it is materially better. You communicate this change to the sales team directly through their manager with a specific framing. We heard that the current system was making your job harder in client meetings. We have made these specific changes to address that, and we want to know whether it solved the problem or whether there are remaining friction points we have not addressed yet. This communication serves 2 purposes. It demonstrates that the security team listened and acted rather than just enforcing. And it opens a feedback channel that will tell you whether the tactical fix is sufficient or whether the capital investment case for a new solution needs to be accelerated. Your second action is the capital investment case for next quarter. You present to the CISO a proposal for a corporate cloud file transfer service with SSO authentication and biometric login for mobile devices. The proposal quantifies the risk of the current behavior: client data appearing in hotel business centers, files on lost USB drives, no audit trail of what was transferred where, against the cost of the solution. You include the sales team manager as a co-presenter because their presence signals that the investment serves a business need rather than a security team preference. The proposal is approved. The third action, running in parallel, is not technical at all. You meet with the sales team's regional leads and ask them to share their experience with the tactical improvements you deployed. You ask them to flag any remaining friction points before the new solution arrives. You ask 2 volunteers to pilot the new cloud transfer service when it is deployed, to provide feedback before the full rollout, and to act as informal champions who can answer their peers' questions during the transition. The outcome is that the USB behavior stops, not because it was disciplined away, not because the policy was recommunicated with more force, because the secure alternative became faster and more reliable than the insecure one. The sales team's experience of the security team shifted from compliance enforcer to problem solver. And that shift is the thing that sustains secure behavior across the situations that no policy can anticipate, because people who trust the security team are the ones who call them when something looks wrong, before it becomes an incident. Closing. Designed for the person, not against them. Every security failure that appears to be a human failure is actually a design question waiting to be asked. Why did the employee click the phishing link? Because the email looked exactly like the 40 legitimate IT notifications they received that week, and no visual or contextual signal distinguished this one. Why did the analyst miss the alert? Because it arrived in a queue of 800 identically formatted notifications, and nothing flagged it as different. Why did the sales team use USB drives? Because the approved path required more time and attention than they had available in a client meeting. The answer to every one of these questions points to a design decision that was made or not made before the failure occurred. The email client that does not mark external senders visually. The CM that does not prioritize or enrich before delivery to the analyst. The file sharing system that was built for security compliance rather than for the context in which it would be used. The posture that this principle is building is one of radical curiosity about the gap between expected behavior and actual behavior. When people are not following the secure path, the first question is not how do we enforce compliance. It is why is the secure path harder than the path they chose? And the second question, the one that most security teams skip, is how do we make the secure path easier? Technology that makes the secure way the easy way does not ask people to be more disciplined, more vigilant, or more compliant than they already are. It asks them to do what they were already going to do, and it makes that path the one that keeps the organization safe. That is not a concession to human weakness. It is the most sophisticated expression of what security design can accomplish.